Perfect. What's up, fam? This is Joe with Schematic Solutions. Today we're going to be talking about high probability point of interest. So now before we actually get into the actual point of interest, we first have to understand what's maintaining our structure. And then the next question we really want to ask ourselves is where are we in the price cycle? And once we can understand those two things first, then we can start scaling down and looking at these supply and demand zones. So ultimately, once we kind of or looking at point of interest, first thing we like really want to ask ourselves, or not ask ourselves, but understand is like the time frame. So we have three time frames. We have the higher time frame, we have the intraday, and we have the lower time frame. Something to keep in mind is just that the higher time frames, of course, going to outweigh all of them. The intraday is going to be stronger than the lower time frame, and the lower time frame is going to allow for the greatest R to R, which is why we scale all the way down to the lower time frame, but it doesn't have the highest probability. So now, with that being said, higher time frame point of interest would be, or sorry, higher probability point of interest would be higher time frame. That's the first thing we want to keep in mind. So now the second aspect that we can talk about is going to be the types of point of interest, because within our higher time frame, intraday, lower time frame, we also have three different kinds. We have our extremes, and these extreme point of interest are the point of interest that are maintaining the structure. We have our break of structure point of interest, and this is the point of interest that ultimately immediately caused the new high or the new low. And then we have any random point of interest, and that's just anyone that's not one or two. So just to like go through examples of what that would be. Ultimately, when we're looking at this trend, we're in an uptrend. That's our high. That's our high. That's our low maintaining. So our extreme point of interest would be down here. Ultimately, we want to ask ourselves what caused the new high, and that was this price action right there. So that's our break of structure point of interest, and anything that's not an extreme or break of structure point of interest, it's just going to be a random point of interest. So what's important about that is understanding that the highest probability is always going to be the extremes. So we can actually place our limits off of the extremes. Or actually, for me personally, obviously everybody does their own thing, but for me, break of structure and random point of interest, I'll just wait for schematics. Now that we've covered the types, we've covered the time frames, let's talk about some confluences, because we have confluences that can make our point of interest higher probability as well. And there's nothing in specific, but there are a couple of things that we can talk about. And keep in mind, these are in no order. They're just listed. So the first thing is going to be when our point of interest pushes down, captures liquidity before making that up move. Another example would be when we have imbalance right in front of our point of interest, or where the point of interest starts. So for example, we have imbalance right here, right in front of the point of interest, or where the point of interest starts. Third, when we have imbalance inside of our point of interest, this is also a time to where we can consider it a higher probability, which is why we're always looking for that imbalance, because it kind of gives price a reason to actually come back down. The next is going to be when our point of interest is filled imbalance. We treat imbalance pretty much like liquidity, or like a mitigation of prices. When price fills liquidity, or takes liquidity, when price fills imbalance, when price mitigates out of another POI, it's a higher probability POI. And keep in mind, we can have multiple examples all inside of one. So the more confluence we have, the higher probability. So let's say we have a point of interest and we have imbalance inside of our point of interest. We have a point of interest that's filled imbalance and also mitigated out of another point of interest. And let's say it was, yeah, let's say literally just those three things. These three things would be a higher probability than if you were just looking at the last push down before the up move. And that's where our confluence comes into this. Now, I'm always asked, how do we know if our point of interest will actually play out? And how do we know that it's not going to ultimately fail? And what I always say is ultimately we can never 100% know if a point of interest is actually going to play or work out. Like, really, all we can do to limit our lessons or losses is ultimately just wait for a schematic. So, getting into that, let's say this is our point of interest. Anything that's not an extreme requires a schematic, and all we're looking for is one drive, two drive, three drives minimum. We get four drives and a break of structure inside of our schematic. Once we get those confirmations, which minimum of three drives and a break of structure inside of our point of interest, we can then start looking for entries. And our entries are typically going to be right after the break of structure as we retrace back down into this point of interest. And once we push and make a new high, the second entry we like taking is based out of this point of interest right here to then take it up. So ultimately, let's say we have a higher time frame point of interest. Sorry. Let's say we have higher time frame to lower time frame. We're pro structure, meaning we're all bullish. Let's say we have a higher time frame point of interest. Let's say we have our point of interest with multiple confluences, imbalance, filled imbalance, mitigated out of POI. Ultimately, that's going to be our highest time frame point of, or not highest time frame, our highest probability point of interest due to the fact of all the confluence, due to the fact that it is higher time frame to lower time frame pro trend, and due to the fact that we are in the highest probability type of actual point of interest, which is our extreme. So pretty simple, family, pretty simple. Just to kind of reiterate everything. First things first, higher time frame outweighs everything. So we want to make sure we're doing our top down analysis, not down top. We want to make sure it's top down. Then we want to really focus on our extremes, and anything that's not an extreme, we need a schematic out of. We want to look for more confluences within our point of interest just to kind of give us more of a reason for price to either come back and tap us in or whatever the case may be. We want to understand that not every single point of interest will play out, and we can't tell the market what to do. We can predict something, but we can't make the market do something. So there will be times where our point of interest are blown through, even on our extremes. It could be the highest probability point of interest and it could still blow through. It doesn't mean it's 100% going to play. And then last but not least, just understanding what's your highest time frame or highest probability point of interest. I keep saying time frame. What is your highest probability point of interest? Does your highest probability point of interest look like mine, or does it look a little different? Keep in mind, all of our confluences, all of our confirmations, they don't have to be the same. They can be relatively different. So just make sure you understand. And once you have your highest probability, backtest it, forward test it, trade it, and really learn to take advantage of the opportunity. But pretty simple, family. That was high probability POIs. If you guys do have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, ask on the live sessions, and I hope you guys